Hi, I'm Loretta and this is my sister, Sharon. We are founders of the plant-based retreat, The Detox Barn, and we're also a comedy double act. I know, funny vegans. Shoot me now.
9 years ago, I was diagnosed with a chronic autoimmune disease and got myself better using a plant-based diet. Since then, I've just fallen in love with living well.
I retrained as a natural vegan chef, and each week we'll be interviewing experts in the wellness industry, as well as sharing the highs and lows of trying to live well as single mums living together with our 2 kids. How well have we lived this week?
You've had some major meltdowns over very small things.
Yes. Something very tiny triggered me. Basically, we've got a new printer because the old printer, it would decide when it wanted to print, but there was no formula for when that was. So you could turn it off and on, you could press this, you could press the Bluetooth, you could press whatever you wanted.
You could pretend to change the ink.
You could do you could do anything you wanted and it would decide randomly when it printed. I said, Sharon, I need a new fucking printer. Just get me a printer, the most easiest printer.
It'll work for you.
No, I know, but you're quite good. You love getting things from Amazon. It's insane.
Like, get me a printer. I need something that works. Oh, you're a PA.
No, but you are literally like, if I say, oh, this peeler's not very good, all of a sudden next day, brand new peeler from Amazon.
Yeah. I like things to work, just to have an easy life.
Yeah. Anyway, she got this printer, but she said it's very, very easy.
That's why I chose it.
Easy. And you know that kind of thing, I had to set it up. I kept procrastinating. So I had an afternoon, well, actually it was the pressure on because Florence needed something printed. So I thought, right, okay, sit down. I sat down and started reading the instructions, and there was nothing easy about this printer. It basically, you couldn't plug it in. It was all done by...
When they say Bluetooth printer, you're like, okay, that sounds easy.
No.
And then it's like, download a fucking app.
Yeah, and then the app needs to be connected to the printer, but there's no Wi-Fi, so the printer can't attach to the app.
Then they're not talking to each other.
They're basically, there's zero communication whatsoever.
Like, they've had a divorce and they're not speaking, and then you have mediation.
Yeah. It finally recognised the printer PCW157 after about 2 hours, and I connected them. I was like, I've got it connected. I was so excited. I've got it connected. They're talking to each other. Now we should be able to print. So I tried to get a print, but first of all, it has to do a test print. Don't fucking understand why you have to do a test print.
In this day and age, a test print, really?
Yeah, waste someone else's ink. Waste your own ink. Test the printers before you send them out. Why am I testing your printer? It's my printer now. It should be tested. It should be working. What are we testing? Just wasting my ink, so I've got to buy more ink. Well, I don't understand. It's the weirdest test ever. Have you ever seen those tests? Black lines. Really loads and loads and loads of...
But then that is giving you a bit of hope when those wiggly lines come in. When those wiggly wines come in, it's giving you a bit of hope.
Yeah, like, those test lines gave me hope. The test one's working.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in the age of AI and printers are making noises like they're about to take off. I don't understand. You know, if you want like a... It should be like, you don't even know, it's like airdropped. You don't even know that it's printing. Bing. But it sounds like a generator. It sounds like it's about to power up the whole house rather than just a simple print. It's a really simple thing. It's so easy. But all I can hear is... and all that comes out is black lines. Anyway, Florence comes in and she's going, is it ready? Because I really need it for tomorrow. And I'm like, Florence, step away. You need to step away. It's 3 hours to connect this to Wi-Fi. And now,
I'm just saying I really need it, so...
You just need to step away. She's like, bloody hell, So finally, I've got it tested.
By the time it's testing, like Loretta's emotional state, I mean, you're at the end, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm at the end.
No, what I fucking do. I pressed it, I printed, I connected, it's got wiggly lines. I mean, she is literally insane by this point. Even me and Florence are just going, oh my God, like, do not go in there.
It was 3 hours just connecting Wi-Fi.
But I think you were pleading to God and almost crying.
Yeah, and then Florence came in, she said, is it ready? I was like, walk away. Don't ask me yet. I will get this. I was determined to get it printed. It wouldn't print. It was paper jam. Every time it went through, something went wrong. Got halfway through, it got disconnected.
But the paper jam thing, I mean, really, I've not even printed anything. It's just one piece of paper. How is there a jam?
I don't understand. I mean, first of all, you're testing all my ink. Now you're jamming my paper. All I want to do, I mean, I would actually, it would be quicker if I wrote the whole thing out myself. Yeah, it's worth paying $10.99 just to get it printed at Snappy Snaps. Go back to the test, because that makes me feel good. I feel a bit of relief when I see it actually printing. So I'll do another test. So, beautiful black squiggly lines. They're amazing.
Very dark, thick black squiggly
lines. Yeah. And I thought, that's great. You know, at least it's printing. I know it can print. So that's a kind of reassurance. It's like a hug. You know, I know it can print. Just keep going. So I try again, and the first page of the document
starts to print.
But that's just the first page of the document we shouldn't have printed.
Just the titles.
It's just titles, but in all different colours, and a picture, of someone as well. So it's using loads of ink for the first page, and it took about 20 minutes just to get it through, because I've got to fill in all the eyes and the nose and whatever else, and then it starts to print the second page.
Very, very faintly.
Very, very faintly. And
then it says,
you need to replace ink cartridge. I was so wound up. I haven't used that printer since.
No, I haven't either.
We've locked it in a cupboard.
Yeah, we've just gone.
And I'm like, just forget printers.
Yeah.
And if I didn't use
I think
printers,
I will go to Snappy Snaps.
Yeah. Well, I then had to drive at 10 o'clock at night to my brother's to get it printed. Anyone else have troubles with printers? Funny how those little things can
bring you to the edge, like to the very edge.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if anyone saw a snapshot of you, they would seriously think you had mental health problems. Because if they asked me what's the matter with Loretta, and I just went
printer breakdown,
just trying to print something.
Yeah. I just think in the age of AI, when I can literally ChatGPT is my best friend, I don't understand why we're dealing with these clunky printers going. I just don't understand it. Make it easy. This episode is sponsored by us, Gavin sisters, and our very first product, Funky Coffee. It's triple certified.
We paid a fortune to sponsor this.
Yeah, we're paying ourselves.
Yeah.
It's triple certified organic Arabica coffee, and it's boosted with potent adaptogens. The health benefits are many, but don't just take our word for it.
Yeah, instead of us banging on about it, we decided to test our coffee out with our guests at the Detox Barn and take a listen to what they have to say.
They're not getting paid.
No one's getting paid here. Let's be honest.
So we've just served funky coffee at the Detox Barn. What did everybody think?
Coffee is delicious. Amazing. And it's not bitter, and it tastes like real coffee.
I was very sceptical, but absolutely it was stunning.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. And did you find, because you had it yesterday, did you find you had a crash afterwards, or did you feel like you had sustained energy?
Sustained absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
They want to buy shares in the company. Okay, thanks everybody. For our listeners, you can get 10% off. Go to gavinsisters.co.uk and use the code podcast at checkout. Today on the podcast, we are thrilled to welcome Professor Paul Dolan, a leading expert in behavioural science and one of the world's foremost thinkers on happiness and human behaviour. You may know him as the best-selling author of Happiness by Design, where he explores how we can live more fulfilling lives by balancing pleasure and purpose. In his latest thought-provoking book, Beliefism, How to Stop Hating People We Disagree With, Paul takes us a step further, challenging how our beliefs shape not just our happiness, but the very fabric of our societies. With his trademark clarity, wit, and evidence-based insight, Paul unpacks why what we believe matters, how those beliefs are formed, and what we can do to change them for the better. Paul Dolan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. What a fantastic introduction.
Pleasure. Because we did interview you for our first podcast.
I remember.
Yes, that was our very, very first episode that we'd ever done. We were so nervous, and I remember the internet connection was absolutely...
We had an awful internet connection.
Yeah. So now it feels like we've really...
It's so nice to meet you both in person.
Yes, and you.
Before we kick off and start sort of talking about the book, I'd love to... Yes. What I love about you is that you're not the stereotypical professor.
No, thank you.
Which is,
You could run an ad company. That's the kind of
way. Well, I don't say thank you to that. But
no. And we've interviewed quite a few professors. So you really are not, you're not the typical professor. And obviously you came from a working class background. Me and Rhett had a little bit of a fight about this yesterday, and I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. you know, they say with children, you know, they become what they can see, like in the home in terms of work and employment. So obviously you wouldn't have had professors as role models growing up for what you could become. No. So how did you become this behavioural scientist?
Not at all. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, but you know, the answer is actually who knows, because so much of it is randomness and chance and all those things that we try to take ownership of and create a narrative around that makes it cohere and make it sound like there's a good story that underpins what we do and where we end up. But so much of it is random. I mean, I did have, if it's what you see at home, I mean, I did have very hard-working parents.
Yeah.
They had a very strong work ethic, had no money.
So what did they do?
Worked hard. Well, I mean, my mum, they both left school very early. My mum left at 16. She was academically quite smart, but it was from a generation where she was only going to marry and have kids anyway, so why go on and do any further education? So that was, you know, thankfully times have changed since then. And my dad had a lot of manual jobs. He had lots of jobs. And, you know, did this and that. And he left school at 15, could barely read or write. So I did have a very good upbringing in relation to working hard. I think that's what I observed. And maybe that's kind of stayed in me. But do you know, again, so much of this is just chance. I was just clever. I mean, that's, you know, I kind of say that without any sounds a bit Alan Partridge, but I was just clever, and I just found learning relatively easy.
But I think there are a lot of working
I did well at school.
Sorry, there was a lot of working class people that are clever but don't become professors.
Yeah,
Do you see what I mean?
quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
So just talk me through, just so, because I think it's the human element of this, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
So you say it's chance and just luck, but tell me the nuts and bolts of what did you do? You did A-levels? Did someone find you? Did you have a mentor?
No, I did my A's. Yeah, I did my O's and my A's. The O's in those days, as they were. O's and A's, and did a degree, and then I did a degree in economics. So the career session was very short. Become an accountant. Okay, I'll do that. I did that for a year. Fucking hated it. Hated it very early on, and realised that this wasn't going to be my future life, and realised very early on as well that I actually quite liked this learning malarkey once I'd left it, and realised that I quite liked it. So I went back and did a master's at York University, and that was a turning point for chance, because I did a master's in economics there, and they have a very big centre for health economics at York. They still do. And I did well on my master's. I worked hard for that. It's the first time I actually properly worked hard. And I got offered a job off the back of my master's working as a health economist, and that's where I kind of cut my academic teeth.
Yeah.
And I felt really lucky to be doing that. You know, pretty much everybody I knew looked forward to Fridays, hated Mondays. And I didn't want to do a job that I didn't like. That one thing I was very clear about, actually, having seen that in my parents as well, actually, and other people around us, that I didn't want to go to work and not enjoy it. Yeah. And so I felt very, very lucky. So I worked hard at it. Again, working hard, I think. And I became a full prof at 32, which is relatively young. So that was the sort of start of it all, I suppose.
And so how did you, because obviously we all kind of have our social circles, and we all need to be like, you talk about it a little bit in the book, but that, you know, birds that flock together stay together. We like to be in our little tribes. Like, how did that work with your sort of working class mates, your working class family, and then you going off to be a professor? Did your good friends stay around, or they just think, oh, he's a bit of a wanker, who does he think he is? How did it work?
I've probably always been a bit of a wanker, but I don't know. It's difficult, because one of the things I do say in the book, as you rightly say, is that I don't think I ever completely left. Like, so much of the narrative around success and status is that you leave behind what you once were. Yeah. Which is why, and I talk about this a lot in Happy Ever After, my book in between Happiness by Design and Beliefism. There's a very powerful social narrative of moving up. It is called literally up. Yeah. And therefore away from the people that you once surrounded yourself with and the person that you once were, which is why we have very few working class heroes, because working class people psychologically and geographically distance themselves from the people they once were. And actually, if you think about who judges smokers most harshly, it's not non-smokers, it's ex-smokers. Yeah. Because I've quit, they can quit. Yeah. And working class people that are successful by the standard markers of success well, if I've worked hard and made it, they can too, and they become very judgmental of the people they once were. Not always, not always, but often. And I think that I'm proud of the fact that I've managed to retain and remain, at least in some part, working class. I mean, I'm certainly not anymore. I've got a job that says anything otherwise. Our family live in Hove. I mean, it's like you couldn't really get much more middle class than that. Hove, actually, as people say, to say that they're not in Brighton.
Yeah. This was our debate last night. Would you consider yourself still working
well,
class?
it's such. Do you remember when John Prescott was asked that question as well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Because no, I'm not. And,
You're not.
And my kids aren't.
That's what I said.
And my kids aren't. But do I have attitudes and do I act in ways that are consistent with being working class? Yes.
Yeah.
But
do I still identify? It's really interesting. If you ask me where I'm from, I immediately say Hackney and from the East End. We actually moved out to Harlow in Essex when I was quite young, but I really identify as being a Cockney.
Yeah.
It's it's still embedded in me in some deep way. Our daughter was born in the East End, our son was born in Brighton. So, but and they do go to a state school, but like they don't have any working class roots in them. Only through me. So I still think in my core I am, but in everything that you might observe, then I'm not. But although having said that, of course, the way I talk, I think I've still got an accent that's not quite posh enough for LSE, and the earrings and the sleeve tattoo and everything else. It's kind of, it's
That's
really
you holding on to it. Isn't
yeah.
it?
Well, what's interesting? Well, it is maybe, but it's also really interesting how other people judge you on that basis, right? So, particularly, say for example, in healthcare interactions, whenever I go in my vest and my baseball cap and I talk and I sound like I do. And they can see the tattoos and they start talking to me and I'll be spoken to like I'm a child. And then I'll try and drop in Professor at LSE at some point.
Yeah.
Two things happen. First of all, there's this shock on people's faces where they have to move you from this very clear basket that they've got you in into some other bundle and basket, which is hard for us to do, psychologically. And then I get spoken to differently, completely like using long words and, as if I can understand what they're saying to me. It's a really interesting transition in other people. So I guess maybe a more interesting question than one you asked is whether I see myself as working class, is whether other people see me as such. And I guess most people will until I tell them what I do.
But because you sort of say in the book, like sort of working class people, if they have a sort of a middle class job, they're sort of forced to either become middle class
fit in or fuck off. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
So is there a core part of you that like, because this is the argument we had, like, yes, you've got a middle class job, but do you still want to be working class?
Or do you like being
being middle class now?
Well...
Or do you feel like a bit sort of like,
it's
betrayal?
A bit, I mean, I think you do... No, I don't know if it's betrayal.
Like, do you go to the dogs and the darts? This is really stereotypical.
No, I do.
But
of course I do. Yeah. I say, of course I do. Yeah. I do. It's interesting about where you feel like you fit in, isn't it? Because probably if you make that class transition, you probably don't ever properly fit in anywhere, really. Because you're always a little bit of an observer, a little bit on the outside, because you're not quite, because it's not your only world.
Yeah.
If you're moving between worlds, but I feel like I am still maybe more at home in it's like working class environments, I suppose, than I would be in middle class ones. But of course, the trappings of being middle class are quite attractive, aren't they? I mean, I had Jeff Norcott on my own podcast, and we spoke about growing up in social housing, where you've got paper thin walls. And it's great for community, but awful for privacy. So when your parents, mum and dad are going at it the night before, you can sort of tease them the next day because you can hear everything. And so we've got a detached house. That's nice. So So I'm not going
to go down a rabbit hole of class, because you do mention it in the book. So I think it is quite interesting.
Well, I mention it in the book because it's important if people say, like, it's great that, say, for example, institutions like LSE have a widening participation program and we take on more working class kids, but it's kind of almost, what's the point if we're going to turn them into middle class graduates? If they're going to completely remove themselves from the worlds that they once came from, then it's not kind of what's the point, but it's almost what's the point, because we're just creating a world of people that aren't representative anymore of the people from where they once came. And I think I feel proud of the fact, as I said, that I've got friends from across the different social classes in a way that actually a lot of other people don't.
It'd be a great dinner party for you to bring all, you know what I mean? Like from all the different classes, you know, to have a dinner party that you're the one connector. So you've managed to keep hold of your working class friends, and they're all It's a bit like me when I gave up drink. You know, like a lot of people didn't really want to be my mate anymore, but those that really did want to, that really valued me, are still my friends.
Yeah. So tell us about beliefism. So what is beliefism?
Beliefism is to discriminate against people who have different beliefs to us. It's another ism in that sense, where we use a thin slice of information about somebody, right? I might use your race or your sex or your sexual orientation to define you as being either one of us or one of them. Mm-hmm. So once I find out your views on climate change, on trans rights, on abortion, I decide that you are either one of us or one of them.
Yeah.
And I categorize the entirety of you. And so therefore I then use that as a way to then judge everything that you do or say as either being good or bad based upon that one thin slice of information.
And that has become, you talk about it in the book, but that has become, that extremist views, the left and the right, has become more so, hasn't it? Why is that?
Well, yeah, so the data, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, so first of all, a lot of the data comes from the US, and we shouldn't extrapolate too widely from the US to the rest of Europe, or to Europe and the rest of Europe, to us and the rest of Europe. There is some suggestion that so mixed data on whether our beliefs have become more polarised, but certainly clear suggestive evidence that our hostility towards those who have different beliefs has become, we've become more hostile towards people who think differently to us. And also some data suggesting that there's been a clustering. So once I know your views about X and Y, I can more accurately say what your views on your views on Z will be. Than I might have been able to 20 or 30 years ago, where you might have had different beliefs that moved around a bit more, but we're now more kind of identity driven. Because in many ways, the things that we believe are our social ties. We think things that other people like us think. To be part of a group with them. And so we've seen a bit more of a clustering in that regard too.
So essentially your book is encouraging people to be less judgmental and try and not to make any sweeping assumptions about people just because of one particular belief. And I just wanted to put it into context in how I behave, because when I was reading it, I was thinking about me and my friends and people that I've met. So I work with someone who I really like, and she's funny and witty and brilliant, actually, really, really clever.
Insanely clever,
Yeah. And then she started chatting about Trump. And I don't know if you're a Trump supporter or not, but I am not a Trump supporter, and she is. And what I do, rather than have the conversation, is I just think, I'm like, I'm not going there. Now I'm going to be put off her, and I just move away from it because I think we're going to clash, and I want to get on with her. Is that bad, what I'm doing?
I don't think anything's bad. I mean, the thing is that we're all muddling through, right? I mean, so I think anyone who gives you this kind of prescription of you should do this, you should do that, is probably not very clever. Right, because it's all a bit of a mess, and we're all working our way through stuff, aren't we? So I'm not going to tell anybody that you know what they ought to do in relation to finding out that someone thinks very differently to them or something that matters to them. All I would say is that that well-functioning societies celebrate difference. It's not just tolerate difference; they celebrate difference. You pick any characteristic or any dimension, and you would expect a difference across people. Our attitude to risk, for example, if we were all super cautious, we would never have left Africa and nothing would have happened. If we were all super risk seeking, we'd all be dead. So you need a balance of different types of risk attitude, and the same for everything else. And so what I'm trying to do is just get people to accept, tolerate, celebrate the fact that people think differently, and not necessarily to change their own mind about anything, but to accept that. It's really interesting when people have got 2 or more kids. One of the things parents will often say is, our kids are so different. as if they're really proud of the fact that their kids might be pursuing different paths in life.
Yeah.
So there are circumstances under which we can, where we can accept difference. We just need to extrapolate that out wider into realizing that just because someone supports Trump, you know, they can still love their kids. They can still care about them. You know, they're actually in so many ways like us, but we've just identified something that makes them different. And so that's really what I'm trying to get people to do. So I wouldn't. So you could talk to her about her views on Trump. You could talk about your views and why they differ. You could try to understand where she's coming from with those views. Almost certainly they have something to do with those social ties that we spoke about before. Or you could just ignore it. But I think it's good. I think it's good if you continue to. I'm not going to. But on balance, most of the time, I think it would be good that you continue to be her friend.
Yes. Oh no, I absolutely am.
That I think is I think is the most important thing.
I get really judgmental and go, how can a clever person be so thick? That's what goes through I'm being honest, like really honest. Like in my head, I go, I thought she was really clever, but
because we try to kind of gauge her on the kind of the female stuff, and you know, like how awful some of the stuff about his views on women, and she's really pro women, but she was sort of counterbalancing it with stuff and like how women sometimes do sort of, you know, get into bed to get positions, and I was just like, oh my god, I just can't go down this path, you know. So we sort of retracted and we were like, let's not talk about this. So can I ask, like, so why did you feel the need to write this book? Where did it all come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think COVID was the real like catalyst for it. I think I came out very early on. I had a piece in The Spectator in May 2020, which was, in a very measured way, as I always was throughout the pandemic, critical of lockdowns and the harms that they would be causing, not only children, but especially children, especially when we shut schools.
Especially what, sorry?
When we shut schools.
When you shut schools, yeah.
I thought that was disproportionate and on balance would cause much more harm than it would cause good. I was pretty certain about that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be...
Do you think you were right?
I think I've been proved right.
Have you?
I think so. We've still got 100,000 kids missing from school.
What do you mean missing?
Missing. They're still missing.
They're not going
missing.
to school?
They're not going to school. We don't know where they are.
Why aren't they going to school?
Because they didn't go to school when they were asked to go. These are kids, I mean, they could be doing fantastic stuff outside of school. Probably not. We've got so many learning problems. We've got so many communication problems. Social distance is not something, children are not meant to be socially distanced.
Yeah.
Adults aren't. We are social creatures.
Yeah.
We're wired to be around other people. Food, water and connection are fundamentals to our thermostat, to our central thermostat. They operate on the same, some of the latest neurobiology suggested on the same central thermostat, and they're homeostatic. So we need to be connected. So we took away one of the fundamentals of the human condition from children at a time when they're learning how to interact with one another.
So what do you think of homeschooling? Are you not a fan then?
Well, that's a different thing, isn't it? I mean, that's parents who are I mean, there may be circumstances under which that's a good thing for the child.
Okay.
Of course. I mean, I'm not, you know, again, I wouldn't make bold claims, but you know,
Going to get you into all sorts of trouble.
But also, you know, but isolating people, I thought was a really, really silly thing to do, particularly those that were at very little risk of the virus. So, but I respected and understood that people could see the world differently.
Yeah.
Of course they could. The problem was that very few people did. I mean, there was like a whole group think around longer, harder lockdowns amongst academics in particular. The whole of the academy, largely, there were some very notable exceptions, and they got properly vilified for being an outlier. So the groupthink was really, really powerful and I would say harmful. You know, I can remember waking up, it was quite personal for me. I can remember waking up on the 24th of March or whatever, 2020, when, you know, that day after we were told to stay at home. And my immediate thoughts were of the kids in my kids' school who were being asked to stay at home in homes where they really shouldn't be spending that much time, where schools were the front line of social services. And there was no one in the room when the decision was made to close the schools that were advocating for the kids.
Yeah.
So all I thought was, well, surely there should be different views. Yeah. Surely you'd expect people to disagree. We're facing this radical uncertainty. It's a new virus. No one knows what we're doing. We should have different perspectives. And the handful of people that were brave enough to come out and be critical were absolutely torn to pieces. and we saw such, as I say, an enormous amount of groupthink, that I thought, how is it that we're not in the academy of all places, this place of evidence and science and discourse and argument and debate? How is it that we're not willing to tolerate people who might have a different view about what we ought to do in response to an uncertain virus? And then, because I felt very alone, particularly as a left-leaning academic, where I would have thought there would have been more voices on the left concerned about the impact on the vulnerable populations that they spend a lot of time shouting and arguing for. Kids in poverty. Where were the left-leaning academics saying the harms that we're causing to these kids are not worth it for the benefits that are coming from these measures? There weren't any. And there were very few. And the only sort of group of people that were against lockdowns were the libertarian wing of the Conservative Party. So one of my LSE colleagues fixed up a meeting between me and Steve Baker, who became Minister for Northern Ireland and was known for leading us out of the EU. And we both came on this call thinking it wouldn't last very long. We both cancelled our meetings that followed to spend longer on the call because we agreed about the harms of lockdown, but we actually quite liked each other, and we actually quite liked each other at the same time. And we wrote a piece in the Times about vaccine passports. We were critical of vaccine passports. And a load of the comments, both in the Times Red Box and emails that I received from LSE colleagues, were about Steve's views on Brexit.
Right.
And how could I possibly, because obviously LSE academics were all Remainers, pretty much, like almost all. And it was existential for them. It was like the biggest decision we'd ever made. And anybody who wanted to leave the EU was racist or racist and stupid. And I get emails from people saying, how dare I be associated with this man, that led us out the EU? And I'm like, well, because I agree with him about lockdowns. I didn't really agree with him about leaving the EU, although I didn't actually care that much, frankly. But even if we didn't agree about lockdowns or about the EU, I could still like him. He could still be a decent person.
So is this what sparked the we don't?
And that was and that was a big part of it. But it was seeing the response of some of my colleagues, including not only emails about Steve, but also emails about my views on the restrictions, saying that it would lead to more deaths. I was murdering people. I remember one senior colleague did actually say that, and I said, and I replied after I'd calmed down of the initial reply that I wanted to send.
15 minutes.
15 minutes to let my brain calm down. I said, I'm absolutely intrigued by your certainty around this, because we're facing this uncertain virus. How could we possibly know? I'd love to debate this with you in whatever forum you want, publicly, as an event or as a blog exchange or anything, whatever. Of course, it didn't get back to me, and I just thought, this is an institute. It's not just LSE. I'm not having a pop at my own.
Do you think he was scared of being in a debate with you?
Well, I think he was. Well, he was certainly scared of the virus. I think that certainly played a big part for people. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have a discussion with anyone about anything. I mean, also because I think I'm smart enough to know that I don't know very much.
Yeah.
and that I could learn something from having a discussion with someone who disagrees with me, someone who votes for Trump, or whatever, and actually learn something about them and about why they think like they do. And it just struck me, and as I say, this is not a pop at LSE. This is the academy generally. This is not an institutional thing. It's about the whole of the institution of the academic world, which became very, very judgmental of anybody who had a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I lost a lot of faith in science actually through that, because people were looking at the world through this very biased perspective, driven from fear actually in large part, I think, like an existential dread themselves, that made them look at the data in a way that I didn't think was balanced. But nowhere was there any checks and balances on what people were doing or saying at that time. And so that led me to want to write a book that would think about how we could design organisations and institutions in ways that help us listen to different perspectives more.
Yeah.
It was an interesting time, I think, and a very difficult time because, conspiracy theorists in that COVID world meant that anyone that actually had something to say that was slightly conspiracy-led got basically
shunned into that camp of like,
Well, that's
the crazy
what we do,
ones.
right?
So,
Because it's so easy to if you identify a difference with somebody, the simplest way to both put them into the out group, to be hostile towards them, and to show that you're right is to create a caricature of them.
Yeah.
And is to put them as a representation of the most extreme version of the difference.
Yeah.
So I was also accused like being a 5G master, COVID denier and stuff, and like anti-vax and all this kind of stuff. I was none of those things.
No.
None of those things at
You
all.
just didn't agree
None
with
of those
lockdown.
things. I just
Yeah.
think if you weigh up the costs and benefits of what we did,
Yeah.
the costs have been greater than the benefits, and other people can form a different view about that. But it's easy for us, and we see this in quite a lot of the data. When you ask people to like give a stereotypical Tory or Labour or Republican or Democrat, they give some like crazy extreme representation of that party or person to make it easier to distance themselves from them.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Loretta, because you're right. Whenever you get any whiff of that, you're like, oh God, they're one of those. And you know, we run retreats, and we had a couple of scientists come on our retreat, and one of them was working, you know, in pharmaceutical, looking at vaccines and stuff, and she just basically said, look, I wouldn't give it to your kids. You know, and at that time, we were just coming out of lockdown, really.
Yeah.
No, we didn't have our kids vaccinated.
No, we didn't
That was
either.
mission creep.
Yeah.
That was a massive example of mission creep.
Do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, we didn't either.
Of course.
It was like, why was it necessary to vaccinate
Wholly
them?
unnecessary to vaccinate children. Wholly unnecessary.
Well, I had a massive argument with my ex because he wanted to, and I was just about to give in, and
It was like going, you're killing grandparents. This was the
that was
yeah.
one of the adverts, wasn't it?
Yeah, but she then got COVID, and she was absolutely fine. I mean, honestly,
But
it was
also,
just...
even the flu stuff, like we've never given our kids the flu vaccine. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I had the COVID vaccine myself. I didn't give them flu because I'm like, they can cope with the flu if they get it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And it builds your immune system.
So, but
that,
it's
I don't know.
you are an outlier though. Even the flu vaccine, it starts from primary. This whole vaccinating kids all the time.
It does, and it becomes a religion. It's almost like like a faith in people. And that was one of the things that really struck me. We don't want to spend the time on COVID, but was how compliant people were and how much they wanted rules.
Yeah.
Like, is a pork pie a meal? Like, you know, massive debates. Can you just tell me, is it or not? Right? You know,
Yeah.
I just need to know.
Yeah.
Not the question about why we asking the question whether a pork pie is a meal or not.
Yeah.
It's like I just want the answer so that I can act on it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, again, groupthink is so we're wired to be round people like us, to like people like us, and to fit in with people like us. Everyone says this idea about standing out and I'm different and special. Yeah, okay, we are to some degree, but we're social animals who like being in groups. You mentioned it before about class. You know, where do I feel at home? We want to belong. We want to belong, and the things that we believe give us a sense of belonging.
Yeah. So growing up, like sort of your own beliefs, like did you have sort of like real sort of core beliefs growing up as a child, and have they changed?
That's a good question. I mean, Danny Kahneman, who was a great hero of mine and mentor, and I'm very glad that we were friends for 20 years or plus, said people rarely change their minds about anything that matters to them.
Yeah.
And so things that matter, I've changed my mind about lots of things, but anything about matters to me. I mean, I've always had a real sense of social justice.
Yeah.
I believe in redistribution. I think one of the things that the left lost, though, was the kind of think that it's only economic issues that matter, and I think they've lost sight of the fact that there's a whole range of other issues that matter to people beyond economics. But I don't know. I think that sense of social justice is still with me. The unfairness of the world.
Yeah, I've got that.
Yeah. But also the role luck played. This is why I mentioned luck earlier. I do think luck is, we hate it as an explanation for things.
Yeah.
But so much of our lives are determined for us rather than by us. And then when you add in the randomness, you've got very little wiggle room for free will.
Do you believe in destiny then? Do you think things are meant?
Well, it's not
do
destiny.
you believe you're
so much
meant to be a professor?
Well, I mean, there were decisions. I mean, did I ever make a decision to be a president? Did I ever sit down and decide? Not in that sense. Did I ever Did I ever decide to work hard? No. That wasn't something I chose. That may be something that's in my genes, something I observed from my parents, as we said before, and I did it. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to be a hard-working person. That's not anything I decided on.
But I suppose, like, for someone like me, you know, like, I mean, I think your life has been a bit. You worked hard and things happened, opportunities came. Like for me, I come from a very working class background as well. My parents are Irish actually, and my dad left home at 15. I really, really observed that work ethic. He came over here and did very well for himself. But I decided to be like an actress, and I really wanted to be an actress, and I was an actress, but I'm not Sharon
Bit
Horgan.
part actress.
Yes, I was a bit part actor. And
We spent dinner parties going, I've nearly made it.
Yeah,
Here's
yeah, I
another
remember you saying
story
that
of me
when we spoke
nearly
before.
making
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So like.
Yeah.
Like, I did decide to be an actor,
Yeah.
but it didn't happen for me.
Yeah.
So is that, it
Well,
wasn't meant for
interesting.
me? What's for you doesn't pass you by? Or where's the choice? Where's the, you know?
You're talking to him like he's a guru or something. I'm not
Yeah,
sure he
I mean-
has the answer to this,
No,
Sharon.
no, well, exactly. I mean, I do think that, I mean, what's interesting about free will is that it's good for us to delude ourselves that we have agency.
Yeah.
Because it gets us out of bed in the mornings and it motivates. And you see that economic growth is also associated with the view that we have agency. But we don't really.
Right,
I mean,
okay.
I don't think I think as we're explaining, you know, you think about if we had this conversation, we were having this conversation 50 years ago, or even 10, the wiggle room for free will would have been much greater than it is now. As we're explaining more of what goes on in relation to the things that drive our behaviours in our brains. And by extension, give it another 50 years, that wiggle room's got less and less and less. So by extension, are we explaining more and more, you know, through neurobiology, through the science of understanding hormonal shifts and everything else, how much is left for us to actually choose, is an interesting question.
So you believe that luck plays quite a big part in stuff?
Well, it's not I believe, is it? I mean, it's a statement of fact, surely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about anybody, so say for example, all the work that was done originally on leaders, and they go in and identify the characteristics that made successful people different from everybody else. And they identify things like tenacious. They go their own way. They don't listen to advice. They go, right. Then someone had the smart idea, let's go and find some really unsuccessful people and see what characteristics they have.
Yeah.
They have the fucking same. It's the people in the
Oh,
middle
I
that
see.
are different.
Yeah,
All that's
yeah.
happened to them is that the successful people have had a
Bit of luck.
random perturbation.
Yeah.
Danny in Thinking Fast and Slow has this great like formula. It says, you know, success equals talent plus luck. Great success equals talent plus lots of luck.
Yeah.
And I do think
I like that.
the we can tell a story about how we've kind of done it ourselves and stuff. And I can tell that story as well. But they become narratives. They're just really important narratives. You know, like meeting, you know, Danny itself. You know, you can say, okay, well, I went to an economics of happiness conference in Milan, so I put myself in the way of that opportunity. But we sat next to one another on a bus ride for 10 minutes to the conference dinner. Did I plan to sit down to him next to him? No. We chatted. He invited me to wherever. So it's like these things. You know,
Can I ask you, like, a really
we
silly
talked about that
question?
before.
What?
Do you remember?
What?
We was talking about that story that everyone bangs on about, Jim Carrey putting $1 million check in his
10 million,
10
yeah.
million in his wallet, and he had all this thing about manifestation and all that bollocks. But anyway, I love to think that manifestation works. But anyway, his first movie, he got paid £10 million, and he says it's because he put it out there, visualization, all of that kind of stuff. And then Sharon was saying to me, how many people have
How
copied
many
him?
actors have done that and not got it?
You know what I mean? We're not seeing those stories. We're just
Yeah.
hearing the success stories.
Exactly. That's what you only ever get that real availability heuristic of the people that do make it, and not all the ones that don't. I think it's pernicious, frankly. I think what that does is it enables us to continue with the gross inequalities that we observe, is because we think that we can richly reward those who are successful because of talent and hard work.
Yeah.
We have that hard work narrative. It's so powerful. You know, as I said, my parents worked really fucking hard.
Yeah.
Loads of people work really hard. Loads of people hold down 3 jobs, cleaning and everything else. They work really, really hard. Like, it's not all there is.
I sometimes
you know,
I catch ourselves sort of going, like, if I'm feeling a bit frazzled and I'm like, Loretta's like, oh God, we've worked so hard and we've got quite a sort of portfolio career, I suppose, but we've got lots of different angles to our jobs. And sometimes I'm feeling a bit frazzled and I'm like, there's loads of people that work hard, like much harder than me. Do you know what I mean? That I've got 3 jobs and, you know, I'm sort of complaining, going, oh, you know, I haven't had a chance to go to the gym this week. You know what I mean? You have to kind of catch yourself.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to ask a silly question.
No, it was in line of, we were thinking the same thing. It was in line of like, do you believe in manifestation? And I think your answer probably would be, I could be wrong, because I think you just answered it, and that's why I wasn't going to ask it again. But having that vision of what we want helps us create the steps, like I suppose a business leader, like they do projections, don't they?
They do, yeah.
In that sense, do you believe it works in that sense, or do you actually believe that there's a universal guide that kind of helps us?
No, well, it's not spiritual.
I feel really embarrassed saying that to like a professor.
No,
do you believe
but
the universe helps us? But you know what I mean?
I just think that we just have to accept randomness. We just have to accept chance. It's just randomness.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, people will often, and you know, and I don't want to be disingenuous. You know, I want to say this respectfully. Often when adverse events happen in people's lives, they find God or they find a story or they find a meaning because it helps. And that's like that, of course. I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, yeah.
But for me, shit happens. You know,
Yeah.
like shit happens, good things happen. The world is really unfair in that sense. You know, some people get clever genes. Some people get genes that lead to other things. That's you know, that's predetermined genetically.
Yeah.
And there's an environment that could trigger particular activations, and all of those things take place in ways that just are way outside of any one person's control. And so we need to be a little more measured in our social policies, not in our own ambitions and our own delusion of agency, but in our response to when people are lucky and unlucky.
Yeah.
And, you know, because, you know, not everybody works hard, but, you know, most people, they do love their kids and they do work hard and they do care and they do, you know, it's like, and I think that's a good place to start with our views about when people have different views to us about things. A good place to start is to remind ourselves of the fact that we're similar to them in so many ways.
Yeah.
So do you believe in God? Can I just ask, do you believe?
I do not, no.
No, I didn't.
No, I
think so.
do
Okay.
not. No.
Yeah.
No. But I find it interesting that really smart people do. And Steve is an
Cutting.
evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
So that's another reason for me not to like him.
Yeah. But is that because of the science? How could there be a God?
Yeah,
sort of
I
thing?
find it really interesting that people. I know that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but it's pretty hard for me to.
It's going to take me a while to work that one out.
I think your book is really timely because, you know, at the moment with everything that's going on online, I think with cancel culture, how do you feel about cancel culture? How is it impacting us?
It's quite hard in comedy. Like a lot of comedians are suffering, aren't they?
Yeah, and content is suffering as well.
But
I mean,
even Loretta and I
yeah.
were like, oh shit, should we have said that? Like,
yeah, will someone say something?
I take what I do after having set out all of the conceptual framework in part one, I then give some recommendations about how we can design our organisations to be less beliefist in part two, and then part three, I actually say what I think about a few issues to see how readers feel about me.
Yeah.
And one of those is free speech, and it's one issue that I have a very clear view on, which is I'm very optimistic about allowing people to say pretty much anything as long as it's not inciting criminal action.
Yeah.
Right. Because I do think good ideas will win out in the end, and I think suppressing people is a less good response into the longer term than allowing people to say silly things.
Yeah,
but people are being suppressed, aren't they? It feels like, you know, people are scared to say things in case they get
I
cancelled.
wonder do you think the tide's turned a little bit on that?
A little bit, slowly.
Interestingly, you brought up Dawn French though, because I don't know, she recently did a tweet.
She did something about Gaza.
And she said something about Gaza, and she said a massive backlash.
What did she say?
I don't know, and I don't want to get into it.
Pro-Palestine?
Well, it wasn't pro or anything. It was just highlighting
yeah.
some of the issues, and she's had to do
An apology
because the tone that she used was a kind of sarcastic tone. So she then had to issue a statement of apology and take the tweet down.
What
and
do you
I think the whole.
that?
I don't want to get into Israel and
No.
But I think that is.
Well, I think I like the idea of apology.
Yes.
I mean, I like the idea of apology. What's trouble? I mean, of course, and also we have to remember that there are generational differences, and we're talking, a lot about Gen Z and Gen A now, in ways that we can't. Like, we're quite far. I'm quite far.
Who's Gen A?
Removed.
Sorry,
Gen A are
You
kids
don't even know
born,
what Gen
A. After Gen Z, so
Okay.
there'd be the
All right,
kids
yeah,
that are born.
yeah.
I think like about your kids' ages will be Gen A.
Gen A. Okay.
13, yeah?
Yeah, 13
Right,
Gen
okay.
A.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're the next lot.
Are they going to be snowflakes?
So yeah, but 2009 or something, I think.
Oh, that's my
2010.
daughter.
I think
He's
2010 or something.
2012, yeah.
I think is when Gen A starts. Anyway,
Yeah, sorry.
whatever. Recent the new kids on the block, and they're growing up in a world where they are on social media, where posting something is there for eternity, and it becomes defining of you. Whereas we could muddle through in person, and we could make jokes, and we could learn socially what things were acceptable and which things weren't, and we can say sorry.
Yeah.
Whereas online, you just it's there, and people take it out of context, and they say that's like that again, thin slicing you as your whole character, and so it's not surprising that people would be more careful.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
my lectures now at LSE are recorded. I tried to resist that for as long as possible because I wanted to be free flowing in what I said, not because I wanted to be racist or say, but just because I didn't want things that may be taken out of context to then be magnified, or actually so that I could be clumsy sometimes,
Yes.
and actually get things wrong, and make a mistake, and maybe offend people unnecessarily, and then really apologise for it. And it's not like clumsily muddling through and just fucking up the whole time, but it's sort of learning, because that's all part of the learning process, isn't it? And I think that we're kind of losing sight. So one of my recommendations is that to celebrate the mistakes that we make. Yeah. To allow people a space in which they can get things wrong.
Yeah.
Because I think most people, again, I have a very optimistic view of the human condition, I think, fundamentally. And I think there are people who seek to offend and be horrible, but most people don't.
No.
Most people are just clumsy. I talk about a mate in the book who would still continue to call women birds, which is something that I never did, actually. I always thought it was a word that wasn't quite appropriate. But I picked him up on it recently. We're the same age, and a few years ago, a year or two ago, I said, mate, do you think we can move on from you? And he was like, I'm so sorry. He said, I totally get it. Yeah. And he stopped using it, at least around me. Yeah. Now, that for me is a kind of progress. It's sort of like a small social sanction of something that I think makes the world a better place when we do that. Yeah. But not some boots heavy wading in saying you can't use that word otherwise, because then you get the backlashes and things.
It's interesting because we are going to round up because I know you're short for time. But
no,
just
I've got a bit more time if you want to carry on. Yeah, I've got another 10 minutes.
I just it just reminded me I was working in a corporate environment actually, and very old school bloke. It was, I won't actually say the company, but very old school bloke in the more of the engineering department of this company, and he kept calling me sweetheart and darling, and I wasn't offended by it. No. But the trainer, who was a lot younger than me, just kept coming up to me going, do you want me to kind of shut this down? Do you want me to go in here? And I was like, no, it's all, I don't think he really. So it started off.
Did he use it for men as well?
No.
See, because I call men darling. See, because darling is a word that I still. No, I do. I call my mate. Actually, that mate that I was talking about, we actually call it, and so other mates. Yeah. I use the word darling, and I've been waiting to be picked up on that from someone like LSE, where I said darling, because I'm careful. I'm sort of
to women,
aware of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm more careful, but I do want to still keep using it because it's part of the way. It's a word that I've used for men and women all my life. Yeah. As a term of endearment for people, and I would never use it if somebody was offended by it, but I still want to be able to use it.
She was like, you can't use that.
Yeah.
I mean, she was like, literally, the only problem was with that, I was like, I think he's all right. He's a bit old school. I don't mind. And he kept calling sweetheart. But as the day, the whole session was actually quite similar to what we're talking about. It was about kind of teaching, difference of opinions and being okay with that. But he then proceeded to tell this most awful, I don't know where it came from, this really awful sexist joke, horrendous. Yeah. And then one of the females, and I'd had his back all day, and then one of the females actually in the room stormed down. I was like, oh my God, I've had this guy's back all day. But yeah.
I suppose I suppose it's emotional intelligence,
yes,
isn't it?
Is.
What is the intent?
Exactly that.
And how is it received? And does that match? And if it doesn't match, then we have to do something about it. So your intent is not to offend when you say darling.
I also wouldn't insist on using it for people that were
Yeah.
offended. Like, why would I?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
'cause I'm not that precious about it. It's not that important to me.
Would
Yeah.
you call another sort of female professor darling, like in the LSE?
I don't know. Shall I go back to LSE and start calling everyone darling and see what happens?
I can't quite imagine it. All right, darling.
I'll take a camera around with me.
Yeah, see what happens.
I mean, I actually
Yeah,
don't
probably
like...
people that I know. I guess
You
when
would,
you know
yeah.
people,
Yeah.
when you know people,
Yeah.
I think it's very different. I would
Yeah.
never say it to a student, or something. That's like,
No.
that's not appropriate. That isn't appropriate because I know
Yeah.
how that could be seen. So
Yeah.
it is having that kind of intelligence,
Yeah,
isn't it? Really?
yeah.
I don't like strangers calling me love.
No.
No.
Like even like cash out, you know, when you're at your...
But don't you inappropriately wink at people sometimes?
Yeah, I have done that, and I've just wanked. I've just.
You don't like wanking in front of people that you don't know
I've just
very
wanked
well.
at him. I don't know. It's when I'm nervous and I've winked. Like I'm trying to be friendly, but I'm
Yeah,
overcompensating by
that's
going
what it
like
is.
that.
All right,
You know?
darling.
Yeah.
You're trying to connect. I mean,
Yes.
ultimately, that's what it is. But
I think I've stopped doing that.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that, Sharon.
I think you should
it
stop
goes
wanking in
across
front
a
of
bit
people.
Yeah.
flirty. If you go back and tell your younger self
Yeah.
one thing about beliefs,
Yeah.
what would it be?
I hate these kinds of questions because I don't really feel like I've really thought about it very much during my life.
Yeah.
You know, I had a philosopher of dogs a philosopher who's written a book about the philosophy of dogs and how we should live more like dogs.
Yeah.
Which is reflect less and do more.
Yeah.
I kind of think I've sort of lived a life that's been more like that. So that sort of reflection, what would I say to a younger self? I always find that really interesting and quite challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I would say anything because I think when you're young, I like the fact that young people often have this certainty in their beliefs.
Yeah.
They think the world's a particular way and it
Yeah.
ought to be a particular way, and that sort of gets kicked out of you as you get older and you become
Yeah.
a bit more measured and circumspect and whatever as you get older. And maybe that's part of
Yeah.
growing up. Like I wouldn't want to be an old young person.
No.
So I'd probably just say muddle your way through. It's probably that much. I suppose the key word, well, a key word of beliefism is humility. And I think that's what we like. Just be humble about what we think we know, and how we judge other people and all those things. You know, I think that a bit of just humility would be good.
Yeah.
And feel as strongly as you feel about anything. But
Yeah.
just have a bit of humility with it.
Yeah.
I think we could all do with a bit more of that in the world.
Yeah. Brilliant.
When I was reading your book, I was thinking about my own beliefs, and one of the beliefs that I have that I really that other people struggle with, and I go into a void. So I have a really strong belief, only because of all the research that I've done and you know what I feel it gives us, is that alcohol is one of the most dangerous drugs in our world, and I find that people hate me for it. So I tend never to share my thoughts on it because
your true thoughts
on
on
my
it.
true thoughts on it, because
Interesting.
I do not want to feel like I'm the boring, you know what I
Yes.
mean?
Or
Yeah.
the judgment. There's a lot of
A
judgment.
lot of judgment.
in
And
it.
I actually physically feel people going, oh. Like I was at a party the other night and someone said, what are you going to have? You know, and I said, I'm going to have a non-alcoholic cocktail. And they were like, oh. And I just constantly get this, oh, you know, and I thought, I do not want to start now, start saying, do you know that alcohol, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so it's interesting how, like, having a belief that it isn't commonly felt can feel quite alienating. Yeah.
Interesting.
I know you like a drink because I see
I
it in
do,
it.
but
So I don't want to have a debate about
totally
it.
Get, no, but I totally get.
Yeah.
I can totally get why you would think what you like. Why you think what you do.
Yeah.
And you know, on the balance of evidence, I mean, if we were talking about costs and benefits of different drugs, alcohol will be right up there for being. If we're going to have restrictions on drug use, I think actually by and large adults should be allowed to consume whatever they like. But but if we're going to have those restrictions, they should be stronger for alcohol than they are for some drugs that you can only buy illegally.
Yeah.
For sure, particularly when you count the social harms in there too. So I get that, but it's like it's fine, isn't it? Don't have a drink if you don't want to. It's like
Yeah.
It's really interesting. People care so much about
Yeah.
what other people do.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and I do think that often comes. Well, it's a very interesting question about where that comes from. It can come from a view that the world should have order and structure to it, and so it's more it's an easier world to navigate if people were to think like I do.
Yeah.
And to act like I do, and to think, and to want other people to act the way that I do. But I do also think, in large part, for some things, it comes from a place of jealousy. I think, one of the reasons why would someone like, so for example, there's this really cool study that I talk about in Happy Ever After about homophobic and non-homophobic men who are first established to be in one or other of those groups from survey data, and then they're shown gay porn, and they measure penile blood flow in the two groups, and the homophobic group get more arousal than the non-homophobic group do.
Are they horrified?
Which is unsurprising, because, like, why would I hate gay people? Well, maybe because God won't let me be gay. My parents would ostracize me if I did. Not in every case, but or because I'm very, like, I'd actually quite like to be the group that I hate most. And I think a lot of people that give that turn their nose up at you with drink probably have a relationship with drink themselves that they might like to change.
Yeah. I think
not all of them, of course.
Interesting.
But there's lots of reasons why people would be judgmental, and we would have evolved to have discussed about various things and whatever. But I guess that's maybe the reasons why I've written a lot of what I've written is like, just all fucking chill out a little bit.
Yeah.
And we can all coexist. Like, people would still choose to do many of the things that society judges as good. They will be driven by status and success, and they get married and have kids. But not everybody has to.
Yeah.
And it's fine not to.
Yeah.
And just chill out on how we judge those people that live a bit differently.
And don't you say that, like, isn't unmarried women that don't have children the happiest in the
data?
well,
there's certainly not certainly, because we don't have randomised controlled trials. It would be brilliant to be able to allocate people to having kids or not, and having marriages or not. So we don't know causally. There's all sorts of reasons why people select into those groups. But certainly some of the healthiest women in particular are those that have never married and had kids. I think the marriage thing is more of a gamble for her than it is for him.
Yeah.
He generally does quite well out of getting married in a way that she might not do so well. And if you look at divorces, they are typically instigated by women. Now, because we don't know whether that's the real reason, but they're the ones that file for divorce. And you can see some of that playing out in the years before they file for divorce, when they're less happy.
Yeah.
So I guess so that's saying a happy wife is a happy life is actually true for men, because she's the one that gets out of it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Rather than him, and he's the one that's got most to gain from it. I think. I think that's again different data say different things. So you need to be careful. We don't have randomised control trials, but I think that's broadly true. It's more of a gamble, and yet the narrative is that we judge women who don't marry and have children much more harshly than men that don't.
Yeah.
I wanted to also ask you about our beliefs and our children. How do our beliefs shape our children, and how do we encourage our children to become independent, curious people rather than just following suit?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, we have some, like, we've observed differences my wife has in our kids, and in the way that the lens, that duck rabbit illusion that's on the book is a very good metaphor. It's the same image, and people will see it one way or the other. It's hard to see it the other way once you see it one way. And I think we see that in our kids to some degree. I think it's accepting of that difference. It's them working their way through. It's the fact they're fucking teenagers as well. Like, I do think, whilst, again, you have to be careful what you say and things get taken out of context. I know that there's a challenge with people like Andrew Tate and so on. At the same time, those that have been most impacted, in some ways, it was a year 9 thing when my son was in year 9 at school, are kids whose brains are not developed yet. And the sort of things that teenagers say and do when they're teenagers would horrify their adult selves. And that's okay. Like, we need to be, again, placing it in context. There are some harms, of course. But we also need to remember that we're dealing with children.
Yeah.
Who, our brain takes till mid-20s to develop.
Yeah.
We can't adopt perspectives. That's the other thing. That's the last bit of the brain that's, it's not a linear wiring, but perspective taking. When they do experiments where you're asked to see, you got some like images on a shelf, and then the other person's the other side of the shelf, but they can see different images to you, and you have to say what they can see. That's hard to do all the way up to your mid-20s.
Really, that late? I didn't think it was
To
that
your
late.
mid-20s, right? So if you're having a conversation with a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old and they don't get your perspective, that's entirely as it should be.
Yeah, that's good to know.
So I
Yeah,
think,
very good to know.
I think, again, humility is like,
Yeah.
let's all just calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
I've got a few little questions, quick
Yeah.
fire round questions.
Yeah.
A belief you've recently changed?
Well, I'm trying to change my mind on Coldplay. People keep, trying to give me good reasons why I should like a couple of songs or whatever.
Oh, I like Coldplay. Yeah.
I fucking can't do it. So
Are you a rocker?
What?
Are you a rocker? What
No,
do you
I'm
like?
not a rocker. I like I like all sorts of music, but I like music, not
Right.
the middle of the road manufactured fucking camera phones in the air at
I
a
love all
festival.
that.
Yeah,
with-
I love Will Young.
I've
I'm glad
got
we
such-
didn't do this
No,
at the
no.
start.
No,
Yeah,
I've got
yeah,
such
yeah.
shit music taste.
Yeah,
that I
my
remember I
wife-
was dating, I'd be like, I can't tell them because it's
No, my wife does call me a music snob, and I think she's
Yeah,
probably a bit
yeah.
right
Yeah.
about that. I do judge people very harshly for their music taste. So maybe I should try doing that a little bit less.
Okay. A belief that brings you peace.
I believe it brings me peace.
Yeah.
Oh God. Well, I don't know.
Excuse
Do you
the
know this?
pun.
Yeah. But you know this, like the irony. Well, it is interesting because I think what we were talking about before about free will and agency and stuff, and shit happens and stuff. I think that brings me peace. I
Yeah.
actually quite like I find it quite liberating that the human condition is quite fucked in a way, and we're self-sabotaging and
Yeah.
fallible. Like it's really interesting when I asked my exec students this last year, and I've done it a few years before. Like what is it that makes us human? They come up with consciousness and self-awareness and reflection, all these things, and then they ask me, and I say fallible and self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
And I don't say that as a bad thing about
Yeah.
us. And it does bring me peace. I kind of like the fact that we're a bit, clumsy and a bit useless and a bit rubbish, and
That's the human element, isn't it?
yeah.
I
like
thought you were
that.
going to say, because you said earlier on that you're very optimistic about the human race, and that brought me peace.
Yeah, I think so. I think optimism. I mean, Danny Kahneman called me an inveterate optimist in the forward of happiness by design. I think that's
What
right.
does that mean?
I do
Sorry.
think inveterate optimist. I
yeah.
think like eternal.
Okay.
Anything positive.
Yeah. Optimist. I think so. I do think. Well, I certainly think it in relation to arguments.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that I heard someone the other day on a podcast I was listening to. I can't remember now. Remember when the BNP leader Nick Griffin went on Question Time? He was making a point. It's very interesting, a entirely different viewpoint. He was making the point that he shouldn't have been allowed on. It was an issue around, what things should be cancelled and which things shouldn't. I thought it was great that he went on Question Time. He made a fool of himself.
Yeah.
And the BNP largely disappeared as a result of it.
Yeah.
Like, once the arguments are flushed out,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
It's interesting you said what brought you peace about that kind of, and actually talking to you. You're very sort of you're good for anxiety because you've got a very sort of laid back, what will be, like the way you talk about your kids. I'm slightly on the anxious side of parenting, that kind of like, they'll be all right. They're designed to be all right. They'll fuck up. They'll be all right. And that brings me peace.
But I think we'll all be. I think by and large, I mean, not everyone is all right.
Yeah.
And of course, we need to, again.
Yeah.
You've got to be careful.
Yeah,
I don't want to say things that just.
Everyone's gonna be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be
Paul
all right. And
Dolan
if you've got a
says
really
everything's all right.
like severe mental health problems, or whatever, of course things aren't all right. But I do think we could mostly do generally with a sort of acceptance of stuff and bounce around and kind of be okay. And I do think I'll be okay.
Yeah.
I do think my wife will be okay. I do think my kids will be okay. I think our family will be okay.
Yeah.
I think stuff can happen.
Yeah.
But they'll be all right, and they're going to exams and stuff will come and go.
Yeah.
And their lives, as long as the key is relationships and connection.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, coming back to it's not just COVID, but the fact of trying to get social connection in. And I do think, like when you said about when you school your kids at home, if people school your kids at home, as long as they've got social networks of friends. I think what's been great for our kids is watching them navigate friendships over the last years of secondary school and learning, because not everyone's going to be your friend. There's some people you don't want to be friends with.
Yeah.
And working out, sorting the wheat
Who's
from the
good for
chaff
you,
and stuff
yeah.
is fantastic.
Yeah.
I love seeing that, and I think if they get that, if they sort relationships out,
Yeah.
not anyone ever sorts them out, but if they can understand relationships, the rest of it is just fucking who cares.
And that's why it's like important not to get, which we don't, but to go and try and fix stuff, you know, when they've fallen out and call the mum when you get all that stuff, you just let them do it.
Yeah, my wife's been very good at that, actually.
Yeah.
Sort of stepping back a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to see my kids a bit through rose-tinted spectacles when they get into rows with other people. It's always like other people's fault.
Yeah.
But my wife's a bit more measured than that.
Yeah, I'm like that as well.
No, my parents were the complete opposite. Like,
They
if
never
I
had our
got
back.
into trouble at school
Yeah.
and it wasn't my fault, my mum would be like, "Well, you must have done something at some point." You know,
Yeah,
I'm like, I
it's a
didn't
nice
do
attitude.
anything. You
Yeah,
know?
no, we never had that kind of, oh, let me go and speak to the teacher. Never. Thank you. I've honestly absolutely loved today, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
for
No, it's
coming
lovely
on the
to meet
show.
you in person.
Just-
It's so nice.
Yeah, really nice. And just tell our listeners where they can get the book, where they can find you, your podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, so Breaking Beliefism is available as a podcast on any outlet that you get podcasts. And Beliefism, How to Stop Hating the People We Disagree With, available in all good bookstores and, of course, on Amazon, where people seem to buy most things these days.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Gavin Sisters Wellness Show. Don't forget to subscribe, share, tell your friends. It helps with the algorithms, doesn't it, Sharon?
It helps.
We don't know what those are, but
No,
anyway,
it
just,
does
you know.
No, no one knows what
No,
they are
no,
today,
no,
but it helps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.